Bienvenidos! Today we're going to talk about double object pronouns in Spanish. Double object pronouns are pronouns that are used in sentences to stand for indirect and direct object pronouns. And the reason these are called double object pronouns is because these are sentences where we're using the indirect object pronoun and the direct object pronoun in exactly the same sentence. So these sentences are going to have an indirect object and a direct object. So the way we do this when we're forming direct object pronouns and placing them in the sentence is we follow a step-by-step process initially. Eventually, when you become more accustomed to using Spanish, it becomes more automatic. But for now, especially when we're writing Spanish, it's easier to follow a step-by-step process. The first thing we're going to do is identify the direct object and indirect object in a sentence. So I have an example sentence here, and we're going to look for the indirect object and the direct object. Jaime recomendó la sopa a nosotros. So Jaime recommended the soup to us. Now in this sentence, the direct object is receiving the action of the verb directly, so that would be la sopa. That's our direct object. Our indirect object is indirectly receiving the action of the verb, and that's going to be a nosotros, to us. So that's our first step. We identify the direct object and the indirect object. The second step is we pick our direct object pronoun. Now, for la sopa, I have a list of the direct object pronouns here. The direct object pronoun would be la. So we're going to put la right up above la sopa to let us know we picked that direct object pronoun. And then for the indirect object pronoun, our indirect object is a nosotros, so we have to pick our indirect object pronoun. It's going to be me, te, nos, os, or se, or le, or les. Now, when we just use an indirect object pronoun in a sentence with no direct object pronoun, just a single indirect object pronoun, we learned that we use le or les. But when we're using double object pronouns, we have to make a choice. And this choice is going to depend on what the direct object pronoun is. So depending on our direct object pronoun, we'll either use se, or le, or les. Now in this case, since our indirect object pronoun is going to be nos, we don't need to make that choice. But in another sentence I'll show you what happens when we need to make that choice. So our indirect object pronoun is going to be nos. So we identified the direct object and indirect object. We chose our direct object pronoun. We chose our indirect object pronoun. And then to place the pronouns in the sentences, we're going to use the smile or rainbow method. Now either one of these works, it just depends on what's best for you to think of. The smile method is where we draw lines underneath that form a smile to show where these pronouns go in the sentence. Just like in a sentence where we have just an indirect object pronoun or just a direct object pronoun, these pronouns go right before the verb in this sentence. But because we have two of them, we need to decide what order they go in, and that's why we use the smile or rainbow method. When we use the smile method, we just draw lines underneath that form a smile to show where these pronouns go before the verb. The direct object pronoun immediately precedes the verb, and the indirect object pronoun precedes the direct object pronoun. So this is how these are going to go in the sentence. when we're reading the sentence, the indirect object pronoun comes first. Jaime nos la recomendó. And here I've written the sentence with the double object pronouns. We have Jaime nos la recomendó. And the reason it's called a smile is because when you draw these lines, it forms what looks like a smile. And the idea is that these lines do not cross. And if you do this, that way the pronouns will be in the correct order and you'll have a little smile. And that way you know that you got these in the right order. First the indirect object pronoun, then the direct object pronoun, then the verb. Let's look at another example. Vamos a pedir la cuenta al camarero. We're going to ask for the bill from the waiter. In this sentence we have a verb phrase, vamos a pedir. We have an infinitive and a conjugated verb. In the first sentence we just have a conjugated verb. Let's follow our step-by-step process to place double object pronouns in this sentence. The first step is to identify the indirect object and the direct object. So in this sentence, la cuenta is directly receiving the action, so that's our direct object. Al camarero is our indirect object. The next step is to choose the direct object pronoun. And as I said before, we want to do this step first because sometimes the indirect object will have a choice depending on our direct object pronoun. So we choose our direct object pronoun. For la cuenta, it's going to be la. And then we choose our indirect object pronoun. Now if we look at our indirect object pronouns for al camarero, we know it's not going to be me, te, nos, or os. It has to be se or le or les. So we have to make a choice here. And the choice depends on which indirect object pronoun, or which direct object pronoun we're using. If the direct object pronoun is one of these, if it's lo, la, los, or las, the indirect object pronoun is going to be se. And the reason is because with double object pronouns, we can't have two pronouns that start with L next to each other in a sentence. So the le and les will change to se in sentences with double object pronouns where the direct object pronoun begins with an L. If the direct object pronoun would happen to be me, te, nos, or os, then the indirect object pronoun remains le or les. This situation does not happen very often. Most of the time with double object pronouns, your indirect object pronoun is going to change to se if you have one of these direct object pronouns. So normally with double object pronouns you would not use le or les, you would use se. So in this sentence, because camarero would be le or les, but our direct object pronoun is la, we have to change the le to se. So se is our indirect object pronoun. Now we can use our smile method or the rainbow method. Rainbow is just where we draw the lines above instead of below. So if we want to use a rainbow method, it works the same way as a smile method. We draw the lines above and make a rainbow. Again, the pronouns go right before the whole verb phrase. So that's treated as your verb and the pronouns come right before it. So here's the new sentence. Oh, this one's going to be before if with Zachar. We could put la here So we have se la vamos a pedir. Or, because we have an infinitive verb in this sentence, we can attach these to the end. We can still do the smile or rainbow method, but because we have an infinitive on the end of this verb phrase, we have the option of attaching the pronouns on the end. If we choose to do that, we can still use the smile or rainbow method. We just have to put them on the end of the verb. And in this sentence, we have the pronouns attached to the end. Vamos a pedírsela. Additionally, in Spanish, just like in the single object pronoun sentences, in Spanish, we can leave the direct object and indirect object in the sentence. So we can use the pronoun and the indirect object in the sentence. I want to show you some examples. So for this sentence, vamos a pedir la cuenta al camarero. We could have just the double object pronouns in this sentence. Let me mix this up. Se la vamos a pedir. Or we could attach them on the end of the infinitive. Vamos a pedírsela. Or we could keep the double object pronouns before the verb phrase and use the direct object and or indirect objects in the sentence as well. Se la vamos a pedir la cuenta. Se la vamos a pedir al camarero. Se la vamos a pedir la cuenta al camarero. So we could use any combination of those, and those would be grammatically correct. Additionally, we could attach those pronouns on the end of the infinitive and still keep the direct object and indirect object in the sentence. So we could say, vamos a pedírsela la cuenta. Vamos a pedírsela la cuenta al camarero. Vamos a pedírsela la cuenta al camarero. Oh, I think I said this one. Vamos a pedírsela al camarero. So we can have any combination of these grammatically correct. In English, if we use a pronoun, we wouldn't use the actual direct or indirect object in the sentence, but in Spanish, it's okay to do that. And for the first sentence, we have examples as well. Because it's just a single conjugated verb and there's no infinitive, there aren't as many combinations. But we could say, Jaime nos la recomendó. Jaime nos la recomendó la sopa. Jaime nos la recomendó a nosotros. Jaime nos la recomendó la sopa a nosotros. So all of these combinations are possible because in Spanish we can include the direct object and the indirect object and the double object pronouns in the same sentence and still be grammatically correct. Now I have a couple more examples. This example shows where to put the pronouns when we have a no in front of the verb. ¿Por qué no traes los platos a mí? Why don't you bring the plates to me? In this sentence, we're going to follow our same procedure for placing those pronouns in the sentence. The first thing we're going to do is identify our direct object and our indirect object. So our direct object is los platos. Our indirect object is a mí. Second step, choose our direct object pronoun. So it's going to be los platos, los. And look, while we're over here, we can just go ahead and look. If the indirect object is le or les, in this case it's going to be se because we're using los. Okay, so keep that in mind. Los is our direct object. Our indirect object is, for a mí, is going to be me. So we don't need to use se here. It's going to be me. And then we can use our rainbow or smile method. Now the question is, where do these go? We have a no in front of the verb. In this case, we still put these double object pronouns right before the verb. So the no comes before the double object pronouns, and the double object pronouns still immediately precede the verb. So we still can use our smile and our rainbow method, and we place these right before the verb. If we put these right before the verb and form a smile, then they're going to be in the right spot. So let's look at our completed sentence with the pronouns added. ¿Por qué no me los traes? And this literally would mean, why don't you bring them to me? But remember, in Spanish, we could still keep the actual indirect and direct objects on the end of the sentence, as well as have the pronouns in the sentence. We could say, ¿por qué no me los traes los platos? ¿Por qué no me los traes los platos a mí? ¿Por qué no me los traes a mí? So we have other grammatically correct options, but we just want to know that when we're doing double object pronouns, they immediately precede the conjugated verb. Let's look at one more example with the present progressive. El camarero está sirviendo el pan a ustedes. So the waiter is serving the bread to you all. And let's follow our process. The first step is to identify our indirect and direct objects. So we have el pan is the direct object, and a ustedes is the indirect object. Then the next step is to choose our direct object pronoun. The reason we choose our direct object pronoun first is because sometimes our indirect object is going to depend on what that pronoun is for the direct object. So our direct object pronoun for el pan, it's going to be lo. Now, remember, if our indirect object is le or les, it could be se, depending on the direct object. And in this case, because we're choosing lo, the indirect object is going to be se, if it would normally be le and les, because we can't have the two L's together. So, in this case, lo is our direct object, and we'll keep in mind that we might need to use se. Lo is our direct object. And our indirect object for a ustedes is going to be le, les, or se. And because we're using lo, it's going to be se. So our indirect object is se. So we chose our direct object pronoun, our indirect object pronoun, and now we can use the smile or rainbow method to put these in a sentence. El camarero se lo está sirviendo. So we can put them right before the verb. El camarero se lo está sirviendo. Or, because it's a participle, we can attach them on the end. So we can still use the rainbow method, but we just have to attach them on the end of the participle. And we would put the indirect object first, se, and then the direct object, lo. So this is what it looks like. El camarero está sirviéndoselo. And there you can see the se indirect object and the lo direct object attached on the end of the participle.